and welcome to Johanna Meyer-Grohbrügge, who, together with Sam Chermayeff, has built up one of the most interesting young upcoming offices in Berlin. Johanna has been graduating from the ETH in Zurich, worked for SANAA for a number of years in Tokyo from 2005 till 2010, before founding the office, which is called June14, so that's tomorrow. Today it's June 13. I heard there's always a smashing party that celebrates the founding day.
So if you want to come to Berlin, that's the best thing about this music.
Yeah, and Johanna also teaches in a number of institutions, like in the Dessau Institute of Architecture, Columbia University in New York, and also the Northeastern University, which is a kind of joint project between Boston and Berlin. And in the years that June14 has been working in Berlin, they have developed a number of projects very different in scale, some more domestic or interior work, and now working on a number of commissions that are addressing one of the most urgent questions in Berlin these days, housing. We have heard a lecture by Niklas Mark recently, where he also addressed that question, which was a bit about the question of housing. I think he also mentioned, maybe during the lecture or after that, the project that June14 has developed, which has started quite an interesting dynamic. We will probably hear more about that, and the question what it means when architects are actually involved also as people who would live in their own buildings together with their clients. Also, Johanna and her partner Sam have been involved very much with a number of artists based in Berlin, among them Thomas Demand. We'll probably also see that kind of bridge project. So that's also maybe something very particular when you work as an architect in Berlin, is that the challenge or the proximity to the art world. Yeah, please give a warm welcome to Johanna.
Okay, thank you, Niklas, for this nice introduction. As Niklas said, tomorrow is our birthday. It's actually the 3rd anniversary that we have, which is not a lot for an architecture office, but still, I think we can look back on quite some things that we developed. And I named my lecture Stories. I mean, I didn't know what I actually mean when I gave that name, so I tried to elaborate on that a little bit during the lecture. So in general, like most architects, we try to make objects, things, and ideas that follow their function, right? So connect them to kind of a story. And I often quote my former boss Nishizawa in that sense, and he said that good architecture comes from given condition, which it does. But I think what Nishizawa does is that he quite reinterpret those given conditions, and because in fact those characters at the beginning are just characters at the beginning of the story. So before we look at our own projects, we look at Moriyama House. You probably all know this project in Tokyo by Nishizawa-san, and Sam and me lived there for our 5 years where we stayed in Tokyo. And so it's like a series of white boxes in a dense part of Tokyo, and it's a great project for many reasons. It's mainly, I'm sure you all know that, it's mainly great because it's really blending something in between a city and the countryside, and blending private and public spaces in a very interesting way. And it does that by very thin walls, by very open spaces, big windows, and very intimate spaces. But all what I said before is actually very different to what Moriyama-san wanted when he approached Nishizawa. So Moriyama-san lived on that site actually for a very long time. And he had a house, and in his house, like all his stuff piled up so highly that he couldn't even see out of the window. And somewhere in his stuff, there was an architecture magazine showing the first project of Nishizawa, the Weekend House. And the Weekend House is, as you see here, a very, very closed project. It's entirely only private spaces. The only light comes in through courtyards. It's totally closed off against the beautiful landscape around it. So because of that house, he came to Nishizawa-san and said, I would like you to make my house. And so in that whole process, Nishizawa-san and Moriyama-san came to develop like one of the most open and community-based projects that I know for somebody that the most solitary characters that I know, because Moriyama-san is very shy and very close. He doesn't like to talk to people and so on. So that's quite into the story at the beginning. So this is, I start with one of our very small projects. A ceramic company from Mexico approached us, telling us we should do whatever, something, for their company that they can put up in an exhibition and sell. And we struggled very much with this open brief. Like, we tried to make a chair, we tried to make a lamp, but we were not happy with any of it. So then we called them and asked them, so what do you actually need? And they also didn't know, but they told us what they actually make and what they sell. And they mostly sell pots. So we said, like, as people who like gardens and plants, we say, okay, so we make pots. So we simply added pots and we added a table. And so the combination of that was a garden table that you can put inside or outside. So it's kind of a customizable garden that shows also the character of the owner, because you can put whatever plants you want to put in there, and the pots, they hold the table. This is our version. This is another version. Let's see here. So what's actually interesting on that story is it was very odd. Like, they liked it very much, but they made it out of steel. And even though we confirmed with them before, can it fit in the oven and so on, they said, no, but we think it's better in steel. So they made this table out of steel, and we all discovered that actually, their main business is pots, and ceramic was neither here nor there, but so it was their first project out of steel. Yeah. So we had like another view of that. And what we like here, that the plants and the things and the plants, they mix together on the table. So the next project is a very different scale that we also started very at the beginning. It's in Minneapolis, in USA. And we were asked, together with other architects, to redo all the public spaces of their headquarters. Right. This is the main building of that. And here's the section. So we specifically were asked to redo the first 2 floors of that main building, which is roughly about 4,000 square meters. Also the garden in front of it, and like a small meeting pavilion. So you see the plan. So you imagine like the facade and the core, like is as it is. And since we found this building as a kind of mediocre Cartesian, Miesian version from the 60s, but it was not used that way because of, it was connected with skyways. You can see here in one corner and the other corner, and just its position on the side. So they just didn't use it as you would normally use it. You would enter from the center, right? But they always entered the building and left the building from the corners. And that's why we simply aligned the circulation to what they already have with those diagonal walls that connect the corners to the core, which divided the program in 4 parts. The lobby part to the south, then the 3M working spaces on the north, and meeting spaces and event space. So you can see a model of that. Then this is the garden that we did in front. This is in the fall. I think by now it's like the plants are much more on bloom. Another picture. So also this garden in the south that created this new entranceway. So that street that you see, this kind of bending thing, this is new before you went straight on. And I think that lobby space is maybe one of our favorite spaces. The other fun thing in this project was that we could, I don't know if you know the company 3M, but they make mostly like a lot of materials, which is never used in architectural sense, but like, for example, they make the stripe on the streets and like little like sandpapers for dentists and so on. And we were allowed to use, or we should use all those materials for free, which was actually also good for the budget, quite strangely, because normally you could never afford to put such things in the project. But so we studied it a lot, what kind of material could we use. And we found this nice foil that is normally behind your iPhone that is very nice because it reflects the light in a way that light things stay light and dark things get lighter. So it's not like a normal mirror that always has a certain kind of darkness, but it's a very bright kind of foil because it lets the light through and reflects it in a certain way. And so that that foil we put up in on those diagonal walls on both sides as curtains because we didn't want to make a perfect mirror. And so that reflects the lens, like on one side the garden and on the other hand, on the other side, the courtyard. So if you enter the lobby from this side, you have to imagine then the green is also reflected and you almost feel like being outside still. So that's nearly done. And then we also added like this meeting pavilion, as I said. And you see here in the middle of the picture. And we kind of thought, okay, since there are like many different office houses, spaces around, we created our own little office building. So this is a construction image from inside. And here, this is a quite stupid story because we proposed that in this location because it used to be an entrance structure, like a big concrete awning, really, in this place. So we thought, okay, we can just reuse it as a casual meeting space. But as the project went on, like they added much more technology, more uses and so on. So at the end, we were forced to entirely redo the space. And at that point, I think we all should have agreed to like put it in another location because the location was actually not so good. We just did it there because we thought it's useful to reuse the structure. But then at that point, like we just left it there. So several millions later, there was a thing that didn't really, serve the program nor the function. But that's what I mean a little bit with, other things come into play, but at a certain stage you can't go back anymore, and then it's there and nobody knows anymore why. But, we still like it. So this is the project that Niklas was talking about, the bridge for Thomas Demand. This is his property outside of Berlin, and so you see the stream behind the trees. And so the house is done by Caruso St. John, redone by Caruso St. John, and so Thomas at the beginning, like several years ago, he just destroyed a certain part of the house, like a big part, because he thought it's too big. And the house is under heritage. So he upset all the community already. So our bridge was kind of born into already kind of very sensitive, upset situation. All right? So he told us, okay, if you make a bridge, that bridge should basically have no foundations, because we shouldn't talk to anybody. It should be done in one day. Basically, it should just be a pier overnight there. So here you see the property, that's Thomas' house, and the lake on the other side, and the river dividing that property. And that round thing is our bridge. So we came to the idea to make an inflatable bridge. That's just a small mock-up. The real thing will be 6 meters in diameter, so it can, when it's rolled up, it can fit in a truck. So it's really only 2 steel discs with 3 millimeters thick that is welded at the edge. And when it arrives on site, it's pumped up with water pressure just to give it the shape. And then once it's a shape, the water is released and it has structural qualities so that Thomas can hopefully cross it. So this is another picture of a mock-up that we did in our office, fitting the thing with a horse, which didn't have exactly enough pressure, so we had, to like order pump and so on, and also that trial kind of failed because the folds were too irregularly, so it could break at one side. But so that's how we imagine it, right? Like a nice little island swimming in the river, very free, with no attachment. But then very different characters, or more to say, different species came into play. So Thomas felt like kind of obliged, because he upset the community, to allow the water, and the water people, to re-naturalize the river and to install a fish bridge. I don't know if you know what a fish bridge is. I didn't know that. But apparently it's something, the river is redone in a way that the fishes can swim upstream to kind of connect the lake with the other rivers. Before they couldn't do that. And so the kind of very romantic stream there made place for a really highly engineered building, which wasn't clear to all of us. But I think if you see those technical drawings from them, and our bridge up there, it's like it was very hard to find like a natural place for the bridge, right? Just swimming there, which was, so it's exactly not what we intended somehow. So here it is. But then, and then also the big problem was that the fish people, they said, you can't do that because it's not good for the fishes. The fishes will get afraid of your bridge. So, quote, imagine the fishes swim up all that way, and come there almost to the end, are super exhausted, and then they see that big shadow, get afraid, and they have to swim all the way back. So we said, okay, and it's really hard to argue, right? Because they are the voice speakers of the fishes, so and they can't speak for themselves. So we thought okay. And then we really went to the highest fish experts, who actually sits here in Frankfurt, and who finally confirmed, okay, it's fine, the fishes are not afraid. Fishes are safe, and so we can install. So the fishes are safe, you're not sure if Thomas is, if he crosses that bridge, but so it was fine. So then we won that fight. So now the engineers builded that pool or that hole for our bridge, which is really strange to us, because that's exactly not the point what we intended at the beginning. Thomas and we thought it really looks like a golf course, but anyway, maybe it's still great. Put it there. Okay, so the next project is a project that is just starting. It's a country house for Georg Dietz. He's a writer at the Spiegel. And so he came to our office with the desire to make a house for him and his friends. So, but he didn't have a site, he didn't have a real program, he just had a notion of a community house where he wanted to be with his family, but also with his friends, or more than friends, right? With that idea, because a country house is often, you go there every weekend or every second weekend, and the rest it's empty, and you arrive there, it's cold. So it's quite a nice idea to share that with other families. So together with him, we came to the conclusion it should be a house big enough for 2 families, but perceived and paid by 3. So that we can kind of deal with that. And that's the site that we found together with him. It's very beautiful. It's like on the edge to Poland. Like it's really like over there when you see over the dike, it's the river, and on the other side is already Poland. So it's really on the edge of Germany. Yeah, so this project is just starting, as I said, and so there are no plot twists yet. I don't know, maybe unlike Moriyama-san, he decided that he doesn't want to be with friends at all at the end. But at the moment, it's like, you know, we're on the process of finding the story. So we made many options, so I just show you all of our options, which are really maybe at the beginning. So first option is that we built a house around the existing barn. You know, as you saw, there are like 2 old barns on that side that are very like ruins almost. So one idea would be to just enclose that barn with a new house. So what was before the outside wall of that house become now the inside walls of that new house. And the rest is just like an open space that you could close off with like sliding doors or other doors. So at one hand, it gives like a new center to the house, but also, you know, it kind of divides the space in a way. Just like some pictures of that. Then the next option, I mean, I think in every option, I think we tried to find, okay, what's the theme really? One theme is, of course, the expansion of the families, right? So it has to be a house that can expand and contracts in a way for like different numbers of people, but also it should contract and expand in seasons. Right? So this idea is basically to just make concrete roofs and also bases that are spread around the site. And at the core, so the core house is really just under some of those roofs, meaning that the rest of the roofs stay open, but some of them we enclose, right, with glass. So we give some kind of basis, but also the idea is that they can then later on decide, okay, maybe we enclose some of the other roofs with glass, or maybe just curtains, or maybe just camp under one roof. So there's like a specific core that is always there for the winter, or if there's only one family, or if you're there alone. But then it can really expand if, like, I don't know, if the kids grow up, they can go to the far corner of the site and stay there alone. If they're small, they're with the parents and so on. So it's a very, flexible design. Also, it could be staggered in, right? I mean, it could first be the roofs and then smaller, and then you could build more and so on. So the next scheme is, again, we keep the old barns, but this time all of them. We take away the roofs and make them as kind of secret gardens. And then we add some other volumes. So the volume on the upper right is also, again, the kind of very, the core where it's really warm, where the sleeping rooms are. It's highly insulated. And the volume in the middle is more like a winter garden volume, where they can meet more in the spring and summer and autumn, and where everybody can meet and like do whatever. So it's a kind of big house, but at the same time very little is constructed. So really only the upper right volume where the bedrooms are. So So this is another option. Here we kind of, I don't know if you saw in the first picture, but there's this kind of dike. So really only if you go over that height, you have the view to Poland. So here we propose to make a lifted platform, a lifted roof, right? And on top of that roof, all the private spaces are, so like the bedrooms, and then underneath, like a bigger community where the kitchen is and the living room and so on. So you kind of like double. And the strange shape comes from, I think, just trying to kind of doubling the ground, right? It shouldn't have a shape really, but just like lifting platform. And then when you're on top, you have the view to Poland, and underneath you have the access to the garden, and are surrounded by the garden. Then we also thought about having little towers. I think same same thing that we're interested here, that in a way, if you like go up, you're very private, and then you have the view. If you're like down on the ground floor, you're connected with the others. So we're always a little bit interested in that kind of relation of like private and public, and how do you share that space, and how can you use those structures in a different way. I'm not sure if you would get permission for that, but this is another one big tower, and that's, I think, similar to the project, or like to the option with the roofs. It's also the idea to just make an open structure out of concrete and leave most of the spaces open. So also, you know, you could, at one terrace, you could just like camp, and others it's just a curtain and so on. So just have a high structure to go high, to look over Poland, but it's not, so it's like, again, like a big house, but also at the same time very small. Okay, so this is the last, maybe the most radical in that sense. This is a big vinyl tent covering the whole site, which really makes like the ultimate, like you don't know if you're outside or inside, because you really don't see the edges of, you know, you don't see where the outside starts. And the idea is again that in spring and autumn, you know, you could use that vinyl, you could be in that vinyl tent, and then in winter you would like more or less live only in those small boxes that are put inside here. So again, you contract, and then in summer you could open the tent and basically let the ventilation through. That would be my favorite, but we also don't know yet how we build that. So here you could, you know, it's really like trying to have almost no enclosure at all. This side, and that in the extent, this odd shape comes from, this is exactly the side lines. Okay, this is actually Georg Dietz's son, like just hiding behind the column here. This is maybe our favorite exhibition that we put up last year in Berlin at the DAZ, in the Deutsche Architekturzentrum, with Matthias Böttger. And this was really like that, mostly because it was a very nice collaboration with the Japanese artist Toshihiko Mitsuya, who we were put together almost 3 years ago. It was kind of a forced marriage by some curator who brought us together for an exhibition that never happened. But we kept on working together and tried to find a place for our project. And so we looked at Toshi's work, and what we liked the most, he worked a lot with aluminium foil. Right? He made very different things. He made like little knights and very figurative things. But we really liked that material, as you can imagine, like coming from SANAA, we like everything shiny. And so we started to experiment with that, and we came up with those, we named it structural studies. So it was, the aluminium foil was really only 0.2 millimeter thick, so very light. So each of those structures you could lift with one hand, and also like you could really feel like if there's a wind, you could almost feel they would fall apart. But at the same time, so we experiment, what can you do with such a thin material that it has structural qualities, and so we did that. That's Balthasar looking up. And so I think, Toshi, we never intended to make artworks, right? Since we are architects. So we constantly kind of we fight it for remaining architects, and Toshi fight it for remaining an artist. At the end, it didn't really matter, but that was somehow, I think, what was so interesting in this collaboration. Now we have another show of this in Cologne in a gallery. Kind of a gallerist called and said, I want to sell those things, which was very new to us, because we are not artists, so we didn't even know like how to deal with all the shipping and all that kind of things. But we still like it. And they had a lot of fun. Okay, so the next project, also an artist approached us, and he bought an old barn outside of Berlin. I don't know if you know that area, but there are a lot of those, exactly those kind of typologies, those kind of courtyard houses. We know there's living house in the front, and then you have the barn in the back, and so on. So this was one of those typical places. And he came to us and said he wants to work there. So we should think about how we can implement a studio there. And we did that with maybe this was like the most strong move here. So we decided to put the studio up in the second floor of that barn that you see here, and bringing light in and lifting the ceiling height with only lifting up the gabled roof in that way. And so this would be the only really whitewashed space in the whole area, and leaving the other areas like they are. So you can see another thing, pleasant section of that. And so, but the other space we really didn't use, right? Especially the barn in the back that you see here. So, as you can, like at the beginning, it was cladded with wood, and we proposed to remove that wood by lighting a fire. Lighting a fire so long that all the cladding was burned, but the structure was just, then we have to put it out at the right time, that the structure still remains, and somehow through burning, it's maybe even getting stronger. By that, we opened up that structure, so it's really like a patio with a roof. And so that way you could also see through the courtyard to the landscape, because on the other side there was the landscape, and before that was completely closed off. So that way we opened up that view and also that space that anywhere you don't need, and just make like an outside patio where you could sit in the summer and eat and look into the landscape. That's like it's a Photoshop of the burnt structure. So in a way, it was interesting here that he came to us like we should implement an additional program, and he thought, okay, we should close off more things, but really it was more about, taking things away, because there was too much space somehow. Okay, exactly. And so that's the next project. It's for the Denver Biennale of the Americas, which actually will start in a couple of weeks. So we have to go there in 3 weeks and install it. And so we and like 3 other offices were asked to like make an urban intervention. And the place that we got assigned to was 16th Street Mall, it's named. One of those outside malls, I don't know, which I think exist often in America. And it was a very, very difficult place to do anything, because it's so perfectly already resolved and done. It's a very successful place. I mean, people go there, right? I mean, there are like benches, flower pots, telephone booth, trees, really like almost like with a military precision arranged along this artery. And buses go there every 5 minutes to take people to a location. There are like many, many booming shops of all sizes and different sizes. So what do you do? And it's kind of, I mean, people like it, but it's also very hard to love it, right? It feels almost too resolved. I mean, even the homeless people, they exist there, but they're also like granted a specific place. I mean, you can, it's very prescriptive. You can, you can drink beer, but only in the closed-off corals, right? You can sit at the benches, but not too long. So you can do many things, but not others. So what do you do in such a place that is where everything has its place already? And there's somehow no space. So we proposed many things. We proposed like a big wall, like a big structure closing off the street. Everything was rejected by somebody who was in charge of, I don't know, the trees or the benches or somehow. So it was very hard to find like a step into that. And So finally, we kind of found our story because we thought, okay, in such a place, the only thing that you can do is to disturb the current condition, right? And so we disturb the current condition in a very subtle and very light way. We install those structures, these are kind of net structures that hang from the buildings, so they don't touch the ground, because also we are not allowed to screw anything in the ground. So they touch the ground, but they're not attached to it, right? So they're just hanging from the buildings, kind of these net structures that we fill with butterflies. And why butterflies? Because we also feel that for us was this kind of subtle disturbance, right? To introduce a kind of otherness that doesn't exist there, like another species that they have to deal with. Because those net structures, they are kind of not randomly, but they capture certain spaces, right? They also capture telephone booth and benches and things that they use anyway. So it's almost like a second layer in the city, like ghosts from another world. So you can't avoid the butterflies. So if you want to use a telephone booth, you have to deal with them. So it's a very, subtle, but some kind of disturbance. So here's like that's on a bench. Here's like a tree that we capture. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so let's see. As I said, in 3 weeks we have to deal with the structural part. So here you see like how they, it's really like a second layer. It's almost like a second city, right? A very small city put in that artery. Okay, so now I come to the project that Nikolaus mentioned. This is maybe the project that keeps us up at night the most at the moment. That's building group project. I don't know, you probably know what building groups are, maybe? No, not really? Okay. Anyway, it's like a concept. I think that, it started in Freiburg, but it's very booming at the moment in Berlin, where like people that want a house become their own investors. So normally if you want a house, you have to like buy one, even if a new house, right, from an investor that builds it up and gives it to you. And this investor always has a certain margin, right? So you always have to pay a higher price, and you can't really say how you want your house. So that concept in a way is, so a group of people get together and they become a GBR, and they buy together a plot of land and are together as a group the clients for the architects, right? Which is like nice in a way, because nobody earns money on that in between, but also that they have a say how they want their house. As you can imagine, it's also very complicated story to deal with so many people. Our building group has now 23 people, and they are all basically more or less our friends and acquaintances. So we didn't put up anything in the internet, which is good and bad. We hope we still are friends at the end of this project. But it really starts if like everybody has to decide everything, right? That's a very hard process. So at one hand, we don't want to make it so formally, but on the other hand, you really have to implement certain structures, which makes it. And the danger of that is, if you build such a house, that the outcome is always like kind of a mediocre, like the smallest, what everybody wants, right? So it's very hard to make something radical and good with that topology. You can, but it takes a lot of effort to convince everybody all the time about things. So we started with that. We young architects. Nobody comes to us and says, "Hey, can you build this house for me?" So we knew a lot of friends that wanted an apartment, and so we looked for sites in Berlin, and we found this one roughly a year ago already. And I don't know how well you know Berlin, but it's in. This is Potsdamer Straße, now where all many galleries now develop, and so. National Gallery and so on is like in the north. So if you go down, if you turn right to Potsdamer Straße, to Kurfürstenstraße, it's right at the next corner. And it's also very, delicate spot because it's the oldest Strich of Berlin, like the strip, which exists apparently since 100 years. So also they won't go anywhere. I mean, we don't want that, but which made it possible for us to get that site because it was not interesting for developers because they're afraid they can't sell their houses, right? So there was also a chance for us to get such a site at such a central location for not so much money. So this thing, as you see, this is our building. So for us was the question, okay, what's the theme or what's the story of such a house? I mean, we quickly gave up the thought that it could be like a collection of many individual houses. Because first of all, you turn crazy, and then I think that's like not about that. So it's really more about like how can the people live together, right? I mean, they were all like only slightly interested in some community ideas, right? I mean, today we are not in the 70s anymore, so like all these commune ideas, I think they are over. We are all, more or less bohemian individualists who like don't like to cook together every Wednesday and share things particular. But like still those people come together and they build together this house and they live there together. So something they share already. And so we have made like really like hundreds and hundreds of options. And at the end, so this is one of the group meetings. At the end, we came to kind of more like a more simple structure, a structure that more enables certain things that people share, but doesn't say, okay, you have to do this here. So there are like 6 towers that intersect vertically and horizontally. And like that's a little bit an old model, but basically they follow the 2 street directions, and since they intersect in both ways, we also don't have, so we avoid those really strong horizontal and vertical lines, right? So therefore, like, it's not like normally, okay, you have your little box and you're closed off from your neighbors, but potentially the whole house could be open, right? The space is flowing through the whole house if there would be no walls. So that way also very high spaces and very low spaces come out. And everybody has a very high space, which is 5 meters. And then depending on size and spatial preferences, you have like a certain number of those low spaces and the intersecting spaces. So here's your plan. It's maybe a little bit, I don't know if you understand that plan. It's very hard also sometimes for us. I mean, it's very simple, but the same way with those intersections and the different levels, it comes out as a very complex thing. So, I mean, for example, if you see that house on the right, this is like one level, right? So you come in and then you have the kitchen, the bedroom, and the lower space, and then the bigger space wraps around that. So everybody has also this very high space. It's basically an open space, but by having those corners and those different levels, you reach certain degrees of privacy without having too many walls, right? We really wanted to avoid, I mean, that was very at the beginning, we thought, okay, walls is really what we should somehow avoid. I mean, how can we be open to each other, but also like inside the flat? And and then if you, but then also the gray thing is always on another level, basically. I don't know if you can imagine. So then on the next level, if you see that right flat, right, and this is like, Cordelia, has like one little space on the upper level also, where she can sleep or work or whatever, right? So you have a very kind of, you intersect with the other apartments, but also you can have like very complex spatial situations inside your flat. And how you wanna, if you wanna close off those intersecting spaces, you can. You know, that's really then later discussion if you wanna put glass there. So here you see like an interior view of that. As you can imagine, the upper right is maybe occupied by somebody else, and the lower one can be the kitchen. And then you can also decide you want to have glass walls or panels and so on. This is another view. So this is the section. And so those, you know, since we, as I said at the beginning, we're really interested in that people, what does it mean if they live together? And we didn't want to make just one big room, which is more often in building groups, right? There's one big room somewhere on the ground floor where people get said, okay, here you can do whatever, everybody wants that room. But it's mostly empty. So we thought it's better if those sharing ideas comes on an individual base, right? So that you, for example, it's rather than I talk with, whatever, Lars and say, hey, why don't we use together a guest room? Because I have often guests and you have often guests, so let's share that room between us, right? Or other things. Other people might say, why not sharing our library or music or whatever, build together a sauna because, you know, I would really like to have one. So that those things can happen in those intersecting spaces because that's where the apartments touch, right? So everybody has 4 neighbors potentially that he can speak to and like think, you know, like then they can also say maybe we just have an open space together, or we have sliding doors, or we just have a door. Maybe it's just a door. So our goal is really that the whole house is open, and we're working on it. As you know, it's still like we need to talk to them a lot. We need to propose that, right? But also the idea is it's not, how to say, that what you share is rather a luxury or a plus, you know, rather than, yeah, as I said, an empty space where you know, don't know what to do. So it always should be connected to a specific function, because then it really makes sense, right? If you like say, okay, normally I wouldn't have a sauna, but like if we share it, then, you know, I can afford it. And so it should more like, yeah, maybe that's the difference to in the 70s, that it's more like a luxury, that I gain something from it, right? So we should think we gain something from it rather than being like a, you know, social idea of like sharing. Yeah, so we hope if we convince the people that it basically can be a very open house where we really walk through diagonally the whole house, or at least can see through it, right, and to somebody else's apartment. Yeah, but let's see how, you know, how we can, or how the people will do it. I mean, a few of them are really open to it, and, you know, a few others not, which is fine. So maybe it's not the whole house, but maybe we can create some kind of diagonals through. Okay. So the next project is also again a collaboration that we did with an artist. Her name was Lynn Marsh. She's a video artist from Canada. And we were brought together by our friend Carson Chan, who ran Program Gallery in Berlin. That was actually the last show, so it doesn't exist anymore. And so he brought us together because Lynn already developed 2 films that she wanted to show, and like they asked us if we could make the exhibition design for that. And she was already working on those 2 movies that were shot in the Berlin Philharmonic. And one of those movies showed, that you can see here, the dry run of the camera on the day before the recording. Right? So she's always interested, and I think most of her films, if I understand right, about a kind of, you know, what is the backstage of such spaces, or like concert, what happens there, the people who like record things, or like who are in the background. So that's like that movie. This is like still from that movie showing the dry run of the camera, which is very odd because you hear the music, right? Because they play the music with the film, and the camera always like shows, you know, like the trumpets and violins, but all the seats are empty. And the second movie was actually to that in opposition, was really in the backstage showing those people who almost conduct the recording. So they, you know, there's like one guy who's like always counting, one who like sets the cameras, one who's like setting the light, one is like saying stop. So it's I was also surprised, a very exciting movie to watch, because you're like, through the whole concert, you're like constantly, as I said, they're almost conducting. So those two movies she wanted to show, which both run the same length than the concert, it was like Nielsen Symphony No. 5. Strangely, the concert exactly that Sam and me just saw on that day, which was another funny thing. And so she wanted to show them almost equally, even though she said this one, since it has voices and so on, people should really sit down and should watch it. The other one, maybe you just glance at it and go through. And she wanted to show them in two separate spaces. So we divided the space exactly in half, diagonally, to show the backstage movie on the upper space and the front stage movie on the lower space. In that way, having again that kind of thing, so the upper space made really the kind of perfect viewing conditions, right? Because people like are on the ramp, so you could really hang out there. And the lower space were more like a backstage feeling, since it all has this structure. So that's showing this upper space with the movie still. And people, yeah. And this is the movie still of it was very hard to take pictures, of course, because it was very dark all the time, the lower one. So the music was synchronized, so you always heard the music at the same time, and the two movies were running there. And that's also, yeah, that's also where you got in, right? So you came in the lower space, so first you were in the backstage and then turned around and went to the upper space. And that's just like so we made it all of, how do you say, like scaffolding poles, because of course there was almost no money, with only those shells. And that was almost like a lying, how to say, rendezvous. So there was no horizontal structure, but there was all like going one, because also we couldn't use so many different sizes, lengths. So that's an image of just the structure. We actually put that up ourselves for a week. I mean, that was 2 years ago. I don't know if you would still do that, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of work. Fitting there in there exactly. Sometimes very crazy knots arrived. Yeah, so that here you see the upper space where people really comfortably hang out for like a long time on that ramp. And that's kind of showing both at the same time. So that was the situation when you entered the space. You could see both and kind of decide where you want to go. So in that sense, I think here we took her, her request, what she wanted, but also almost her concept of the movies very literally. So that's there. Unlike many others that I showed, was no like plot twist or something unexpected. So there was for like really a literal transformation. But what was still nice for us, that we discovered things that we didn't know before. I mean, for example, we did that 2.5 years ago, and we were really into, coming from SANAA, very light structures. But we discovered that kind of aesthetic of those that came often again after, which he didn't see maybe now, but that was the interesting point for us. So I'm already at the end, very short. I mean, I think what I said at the beginning, I mean, when I was asked to make this lecture and send a title, because I had to send a title, I sent the title Stories. And at that point, I really thought stories in a way of, I mean, that's the way how we create our architecture, right? We are always in search for the right story, for the right answer, right? To connect the people and the places and the characters that come into that story to one storyline, to one narrative somehow. But then when I looked at our project and looked back, I realized that, you know, like always what you thought was there at the beginning, or what was important at the beginning, is never important at the end. Because so often like unexpected things happen that twist the story, and that's also a good thing. I mean, you wouldn't come to that story if you wouldn't look for it at the first place, right? So that's, I don't mean like bad things that happen in between, but somehow that's like part of the process. So that's why it's very important, I think, for me, just like stay open as long as possible, right? And to really like that process of like asking questions to answer the first questions over and over, which gets you to like that, you know, kind of plot twist, which you don't realize during the process, but just by looking back, you think like, wow, at the beginning I thought that really differently, but it's still part of the story somehow. Like today, no, this lecture. I mean, I started off, I think the story is something really different than what I thought at the end. Okay. Thank you. Was that very short?
Perfect.
Yeah, good. Nice to Thank you.
There's some questions. Okay, let's start first. Thank you for you will inevitably face those kind of comparisons because you're having a strong teacher. So, excuse myself, but my question is, what did you take from Nishizawa, what you didn't, and what you added from yourself?
Okay.
For your project?
Okay. I mean, maybe I have to say, like, just to be fair, like Nishizawa and Sejima, right? I mean, I can't really distinguish like so much, but I mean, I guess what I took was really like indeed that way what I described, like how do you find an answer? I mean, like just kind of a toolbox. Okay, several things. Sorry, step back. One thing is a kind of toolbox. How you find the project or the idea for yourself, which is like very much based on making thousands of options, right? And that way you can stay open for a very long time, right? I mean, that's also what I meant. Like if you immediately decide, oh, that's nice, that's what I do, that sounds right. You're like, you're closing off so many possibilities that you don't know maybe exist, right? And like also by making option, I mean, you make one thing and then you leave it. Next thing, leave it. You don't think about it too much. You can, trick your own mind and keeping on searching for the best thing, and then you just wait until something comes where you feel, okay, that's very exciting, that kind of, fits to what is there or what can also change the place. And as I said, that it's important that it's not only the right answer and makes everything right, but it really changes something, right? By like twisting the story or the characters or something like that. And you can only do that by like working on it a lot, right? You kind of abstract everything and like, kind of walk it through and so on until like you arrive at something which still has the ingredients from the beginning, but it arrives at something really else. So that's, I think, what I took, which is just as a toolbox, and also how to develop it. I guess what I also took is like how to organize an office, which is maybe not the best way, but our staff mostly complain about that. But that's what I took, and what I try to get away from to say is that, or what I don't, is that kind of like aesthetic. I mean, I know you still see it, but I'll be trying very hard to arrive at something new, because I also, think there's a little bit more to add somehow in that sense.
Yeah, so I think the question is very interesting for different reasons. I think it's interesting, obviously, because Susanne has been very influential on you, and there are also others who work there. Andreas, it's very influential, and a lot of us are looking at their work that we have seen it. So I was thinking, for instance, at one point to ask you what white means to you, for instance, but I'm going to answer that.
Please not.
No, because I think I would like to leave the question to the lecture by Niklas Mark that Niklas also referred to. Because he also used many of the same project that you had initially to refer to. And I suppose he celebrated for basically the social aspect. Quite forthright also would be that I thought maybe he was confounding a few different things, such as social space with social housing, with social life, or whatever. But one thing that came after, he sort of rejected what he referred to, that many people would ask a question to him, well, you can do that in Japan, you can't do it here. But I thought maybe another thing is not, and I certainly believe one can do it, but I think the question is rather how one does it.
Yeah.
And I think, what do you think about precisely because you take that social model into that last housing project in some ways. There are some traces.
In some ways, indeed. Yeah.
But how do you begin to think through it then, in the context of Berlin and with this larger group of people?
Yeah.
So that must be very exciting on one hand, but also very challenging.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, that's what I mean. It's very hard. I mean, that one thing, it's easier in Japan. I mean, first of all, Japanese people are very quiet, more quiet, and like more, like, so if in Moriyama House it was like never a problem, because like, that kind of soft boundaries is easier there to implement, because Japanese people are just from the beginning a little bit more quiet and more respectful, right? So like I almost had the feeling like when we lived there that we more impose the people, the outside, than the other way around. So it's like, so that I think is one difficulty, right? They're just like a little bit stronger characters and so on. And then, what I tried to describe at the beginning, I think we are all, as I said, like very strong individualism, like almost like bohemian, at least all the people in that building, right? And also like the whole question about ownership and so on is like very differently seen there. And I mean, as I said, those are the points that we thought we need to, in order to create any kind of shared thought in that house, we need to see, as I said, like they really need to see, okay, it's something additional that I get, right? So that's what I meant with like kind of luxury, almost like gadgets, or I don't like, that's like something. And in terms of boundaries, I'm not sure. It's true, like it doesn't, what we really want to get at is like not closing the walls. And to be honest, we don't know exactly the question, like how can we not close the walls, but like still stay individual, and that in the context of Berlin, right? So I think we're still finding that out, and I think that house that we created is more like a structure but like how it's actually going to work inside is still very open, and that is still the most work, right, that we have to do with the people. I think it's also, I'm very curious. At the moment, many of them are also open. They say like, yeah, sure, right? But, how does it really, it's also them who do that, who build that then, right? And I'm kind of...
Also, interesting that happens, I think, I'm sure you use it correctly. You seem to be internalizing some of the dynamics that take place more with respect to partly it's massive in the Japanese case, whereas you turn it, I mean, I think it seems to me that the section is absolutely fundamental to understand the project, but also I would imagine that it's also where you basically need to work.
On the section.
Yeah, that basically what you want to stage to the house needs to be worked out in the section.
Totally, yeah, no, absolutely. In those intersecting spaces, that's what I meant. I mean, it's really just the structure, but what happens there is so crucial that the house doesn't just become like a nice, fancy structure, but like that actually it has some meaning. That's the biggest work, and we're also not sure how we do that, because on one hand I think we have to curate that somehow, and we have to somehow suggest to them what they could do there. On the other hand, we also don't want to force somebody, so that balance is a very difficult one.
Maybe just jump on that as well. There's I can't remember the author, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I won't remember it. But American critic that discussed the Moriyama House in terms of lifestyle. And basically, it seemed to me to touch upon something that it's different than the social, possibly different than the social argument. But it's lifestyle, I don't not to be understood in a derogatory fact about our current time. But you actually also used now the word choreograph the space. So it seems to be, it seems to be a very drastic thing to do with respect to the people who...
Yeah, I know, but we really want to, that's the only way to get something further now. That's exactly, it's a little bit like the story with, Moriyama-san, he didn't want that, he wanted a very closed house, and he ended up with that, but now he's happy. Okay, that goes really far, should architects do what they ask for or not, but,
I think it's an interesting question, actually, what is this relation to an architect?
Yeah.
This sort of client.
Yeah.
It's a bit, it seems as if you almost have possibility of productive misunderstanding.
Yeah.
You don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. The good.
It's a kind of risk. I think it's one where things about architecture.
Yeah, sure.
Although it might not match the expectations.
No, I know.
Neither those of the clients nor exactly those that took on right at the beginning as an architect.
Exactly. I think really good, good clients and also good architects, they just don't know what they want, right? That makes good, if you do that, then it's then it's done, I don't know, somehow. So that search together is where you can create something new, right? I really believe that. I still believe, maybe because, I don't know, we just started, whatever, the project started, but I really believe that that's possible. That you can, get further. Otherwise there is no point in being an architect. It's anyway, you don't earn much money, so at least you should have fun, creating something new. That's otherwise, why are we doing that?
That's great. When we continue discussion with some drinks,
sure.
I think it's encouraging last word for the remaining 3 weeks. Great project. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.